As NASCAR begins to pivot towards more road courses and perhaps more short tracks, the once great intermediate tracks of the West seem to be a dying breed. However, there are still many of them on the current NASCAR schedule, and we're going to rank them here today. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric and welcome to a special edition of Out of the Groove. Today, we're bringing back out the Groovy Grid. I've done a couple of these types of videos now, but if you're new, the Groovy Grid basically operates like one of those tier lists you've seen everyone on like Twitter doing in the last couple of years. But we feature an exclusive Groovy tier category that only the best of the best are allowed to enter. Today, we're looking at intermediate racetracks on the NASCAR schedule. That includes mile and a halfs, of which there are still many, despite Chicagoland and Kentucky Speedway effectively being nixed this year. We're also looking at the 2-mile tracks like Auto Club in Michigan, as well as those weird in-between tracks like Darlington, and we'll throw in Nashville Super Speedway as well, making its return to the NASCAR schedule this summer. So let's get to it. We've got a lot of tracks to look at. Let's start with a classic, a staple if you will. Let's start with Charlotte Motor Speedway, located right in the center of the NASCAR hub world, like it's a video game or something. The Speedway Motorsports own track is of course the home of the Coca-Cola 600, the longest race on the NASCAR schedule, a crown jewel event for decades and decades. Charlotte Motor Speedway of course has evolved in recent years, with the fall race turning into a road course Roval edition, so we're not really focusing on that. We're focusing on the mile-and-a-half classic, as God intended version of Charlotte Motor Speedway, and it's a solid racetrack. We're getting off to a very solid start. I can't put it in Groovy tier, even though it's, the Coke 600's out crown jewel, but it's still a solid overall track. The groove is fairly wide, and hey, Charlotte Motor Speedway gets some points for adding turf to the infield. They did that mainly because of the Roval configuration, but now it has the exclusive title of the only intermediate track without those dastardly evil grassy infields that tear up splitters left and right. So for that, Charlotte, they've already saved some bumpers just in the last year or two alone. So credit to Charlotte Motor Speedway for taking that plunge. They're gonna go in B tier. Charlotte Motor Speedway is a solid B tier intermediate track in my opinion, a staple for Speedway Motorsports. Let's move on to another SMI track. Let's head just down south a bit now. Let's talk about Atlanta Motor Speedway. Atlanta Motor Speedway has seen its own share of significant changes to its facility over the many years, but from an aerial view at least, it looks almost identical to Charlotte Motor Speedway's mile-and-a-half quad oval. This may be my hottest take on this list. I think Atlanta Motor Speedway is a bit overrated. You ask around, what's your favorite mile and a half? Most people say, oh, well, the mile and a half suck. What are you talking about? But then people will say, oh, except for Atlanta. Atlanta is great because the track is so abrasive. Drivers have to manhandle the race cars, slipping and sliding. Cars are always fishtailing, and that's what makes the track fun. That's where all the track's character comes from, and it is a lot of character. So you'll hear fans say that a lot, and they'll say Atlanta is one of their, if not their favorite, mile and a half track on the schedule, and I just think it's overstayed its welcome a bit. Like 10, 15, 20 plus years ago, it was known for those fantastic Atlanta finishes. Earnhardt versus Labonte, Gordon versus Harvick, Johnson versus Edwards. And of course, I like watching the challenges that old wore out surface, throws at drivers. But when I say it's overstayed its welcome, these days I just feel like it's too wore out if possible. Like now you run one lap under green, hell you run one lap under caution, and you basically need 4 fresh tires or else you're gonna be off the pace. Like Atlanta races the last several years now have been almost completely devoid of any sort of tire strategy. There's no chance for teams or crew chiefs to get creative or to take a gamble or risk, because if you ever even think about not taking 4 fresh tires during a caution period, you're done for. And I don't know, while it's fun to watch the guys slip and slide, even with high downforce, you still see guys get loose at Atlanta Motor Speedway. I just feel like no strategy whatsoever. That knocks it down a peg or two. It's not a bad track by any means. I'm just saying it's not quite the A or the Groovy tier I think some people put it in. I'm going to put Atlanta Motor Speedway in the C tier. I mean, there have already been rumblings that they're going to completely overhaul and renovate the facility, change the configuration, repave the track, add a bunch of other amenities around it, and honestly, I'm kind of looking forward to that if it does indeed happen. Sign me up. I'm all for it. Now, keeping with SMI and talking about potential repaves or reconfigurations, we've got to look at the poster child of how not to do a repave and reconfiguration. Texas Motor Speedway, the closest thing I've ever had to a home track in all my years of being a NASCAR fan. 10 years ago, Texas Motor Speedway would have probably been in the A tier, I think, on this list. Texas Motor Speedway was a great track. It was a wore-out surface that allowed for multiple grooves of racing that changed throughout the race, throughout the run. Speeds were incredibly fast. The facility's always been very well maintained since it opened in the late 90s. I mean, they got like the world's largest HD television or something like that. I think it still holds that record, perhaps. I mean, hey, that's pretty cool. But the decision to not only repave the whole track, but also to reconfigure turns 1 and 2 after the 2016 season and that lengthy rain delay, that fall race, and rain shortened race actually, ultimately that sealed this track's fate, because now the last roughly 5 years, this track has not produced consistently good racing. To be honest, not even consistently watchable racing at times. It's turned the track into basically a 190 mile an hour conveyor belt. There have been some decent races still, like 2018 had some fun moments. I remember being at that race and enjoying myself. Like, I thought it was a pretty entertaining race, but last couple years, maybe it's the rules package, maybe it's the tire combo Goodyear's bringing, but this track does not wear on tires at all. Contrast that with Atlanta, where that just abuses tires. Texas Motor Speedway, it's almost like the track is adding rubber to the tires throughout the run. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's still a decent facility. It's still a huge facility, seats well over 150,000 fans without any issue. Great amenities around the track and everything, but the racing product is garbage. It just doesn't feel right watching a race at Texas Motor Speedway these days. You get the high downforce package for the Cup cars. They put so much PJ1 all over the track, desperately trying to entice drivers to widen the groove, and it just, all of these efforts have for the most part been fruitless at this point. It's a treacherous, like I said, 190 mile an hour conveyor belt more often than not, with absolutely no tire wear to be seen, no strategy plays really, except just don't pit like the RCR cars did last year and got to win the race. I mean, think about that. Reddick and Austin Dillon, two average cars, decent drivers with like much older tires than the rest of the field, stayed out and finished 1-2 for several laps. Like, tire wear is not a thing at Texas. So Texas Motor Speedway, I'm sorry, home track, it's an F. It is an F tier. It's an F tier racetrack, unfortunately. Even for an intermediate standards, it's an F tier. And it's a shame because, like I said, 10 years ago, this was unironically one of the better intermediate tracks on the schedule. Not anymore, and it really seems to all go back to that repave and reconfiguration. Don't know what they were thinking, but it did not work, at least from what I can see. The final Speedway Motorsports entry on this list, Las Vegas Motor Speedway. It's a quality racetrack. What more can I really say? I've only been there once, but it's a nice facility, seems very up to date. The Neon Garage, which was built like 14, 15 years ago, really set the tone, really set the standard for fan access in the infield and the garage area. In some ways, you could say it was ahead of its time. Of course, the track has been reconfigured significantly once in its history. They added banking to the track in the mid-2000s. It's still not quite as high banked as, tracks like Atlanta or Charlotte, but it has more banking than it used to. And the groove is wide and tire wear is existent. So Las Vegas is an A-tier track in my opinion. We just saw the Xfinity trucks and Cup cars head there a few weeks ago, and I thought it was a really solid race. Doesn't seem to matter the rules package or the style of cars. Las Vegas puts on a pretty solid show twice a year. I'm okay with it having 2 dates. There was a time where I thought that was a little risky or questionable, but it's honestly lived up to expectations or maybe exceeded expectations the last few years. So Las Vegas sits nice and tightly there in the A tier. Let's talk Kansas Speedway. Kansas is a difficult one because the most recent race at Kansas was that frustrating finish between Harvick and Joey Logano. I blame the rules package more than anything because Kansas Speedway, 8 years ago, when did they repave it? 2012, I believe? Immediately after that repave, Kansas kinda sucked. It was a one groove track. It was not great racing for a couple years there. Early in the Gen 6 era, Kansas was a skip if you have something better to do on Sunday kind of race. But now with the progressive banking, the groove has widened out a bit more, and even with this polarizing high downforce package, we've seen some great races, say 2019. We've also seen some bad races, say 2020 fall. But the point is it can still produce great racing, and I know what it can do with a perhaps different rules package. I'm excited to see how the next gen cars race at tracks specifically like Kansas Speedway with that progressive banking, a track surface that's starting to wear out, starting to show age, and I think that's great. What puts Kansas Speedway over the edge, granted I have not been to Kansas, but I know many people who have, and they constantly rave about all the amenities both at and around the facility. From the sounds of it, it's one of the best tracks across the entire schedule, across the country, to see a NASCAR race at. Kansas is one I have highly circled on my list to get to as soon as humanly possible. So with that in mind, because amenities do matter, the racing is important, but so does everything else, I think Kansas is an A-tier track. Once I go to Kansas in person, hopefully soon, I'll know for sure if that ranking is accurate, but I'm gonna put Kansas Speedway in the A tier. I think last year's fall race was maybe an outlier, and I'm hopeful that we can see better days for this track in the near future. All right, another ISC track, Homestead Miami Speedway, the site of championship weekend for many, many years. Now it's lost that prestige prestigious place on the schedule, but it's still a fantastic racetrack. This year's race weekend, just a couple weeks ago, honestly sealed the deal for me. The Xfinity cars put on a tremendous show, and so did the Cup cars. Two wildly different styles of racing, different rules packages, and they both managed to put on a great show. To me, that's a credit to Homestead Miami Speedway being a multi-groove track, a driver's track that drivers often say is one of their favorites, that drivers look forward to. Think about what Noah Gragson has said, what Tyler Reddick, what Larson have said about this track. They love this track. You can't say that about many other intermediate tracks on the schedule. Drivers that just love it. Homestead has character. It's a nice facility, even though they've had to tear down some grandstands in recent years. Homestead's great. I love Homestead Miami Speedway. This, I believe, is a worthy entry into the prestigious Groovy tier here on the Groovy grid. Congratulations, round of applause to Homestead Miami Speedway. I hope that one day it gets a shot at being the championship weekend again. Maybe they start rotating that date at some point, or at the very least, I'd like to see Miami get a second date. You know, there were rumblings a couple years ago even that Homestead Miami Speedway could get sold, could end up closing down. I hope that does not happen. I hope Homestead Miami Speedway is in it for the long haul. I wish they could freeze this track right now so that the surface doesn't wear out anymore. It's perfect the way it is now. I wish Homestead would never change from how it sits right now in South Florida, but unfortunately it probably will. In the meantime, it's in the Groovy tier for sure. Let's talk about the two-mile racetracks on the schedule now, both owned by ISC. Let's start out west with Auto Club Speedway. That's the one of the two-mile tracks that I've actually been to personally. It's had some fantastic finishes in the last 10 years or so, like Johnson versus Harvick in 2011 or 2013, Logano versus Hamlin with Kyle Busch. It's a wide racetrack. For years there when NASCAR was running a higher horsepower package, it was incredibly fast. They were hitting speeds up around 210 going into turn one, like no other track on the schedule really had that claim to fame. So Auto Club Speedway statistically is impressive, but when we actually step back and especially examine the last several years of racing at the facility, it's not particularly remarkable. You know, there's a reason I believe ISC and NASCAR are looking at completely demolishing it and turning it into a half-mile short track here in the next couple of years. It's still on this list because, at least as far as next year is concerned, they're expected to race at the 2-mile configuration one last time, but you know, it's not a great track. It's not a super exciting or inspirational track. I think it'll be better suited as a half-mile short track here in a few years, but it's not terrible. I can't fail it or put it down in like D. I'll put it in C tier. It's just average, I'd say. It's in a cool location. I mean, it's pretty far from like LA. It's like an hour away from LA, but you got the mountains peeking up over the horizon. It's a cool looking location, I'll be honest, but average racing. Michigan International Speedway is another track that really has never quite gotten back to that same magical place it was at before its most recent repave about 9 years ago. Used to have it's a wide racetrack, and the drivers used to take advantage of all that width, not just on the straightaways, but even in the corners. You could run any line imaginable. But even now, years after its most recent repave, and it just has never quite gotten really close to what it once was in that respect. The racing is fine, but not fantastic. It does seem to have a very loyal fan base up there in Michigan. It does get 2 dates a year, and the stands are often pretty full for both races. So credit to those fans. They love their Michigan International Speedway. I wish I could say the same. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I got to get there in person and see what they're seeing. But to me, much like its clone or its twin, if you will, Auto Club, I think it's a C-tier track. I'm sorry, that's the best I think I can do for it. We've hit all the 1.5 miles, so we've hit on the 2-miler tracks. Now let's talk about those two weird outliers, those tracks that aren't quite 1.5 miles in length, but are still considered, by my calculations at least, to be intermediate tracks. Let's start with, I guess, the all-new track, new to the Cup Series schedule this year, Nashville Super Speedway. NASCAR has not raced at that track in 10 years. It used to just be, you know, the lower series that would race there occasionally. Cup Series is heading there for the first time ever this year. All the series are returning there for the first time ever this year, and that's cool. It's great that NASCAR is making a push to get back into Nashville. Of course, every fan is more interested in the Nashville Fairgrounds, but Nashville Super Speedway, a 1 1/3 mile concrete oval, will have to do in the meantime. You know, I don't really remember much about a lot of the Xfinity races from back in the day. I know Concrete Carl Edwards used to win a lot of them and had a lot of those beautiful Gibson Les Paul guitars in his closet, but I don't remember the racing being particularly great. This track's really a wild card to me. I'm gonna put it in C tier because I don't really know where to put it at this point. How has the surface aged in the last 10 years? How will these current cars and this rules package react to it? They are running the high horsepower rules package at this track, so that's gonna be fun. Low downforce downforce and all that great stuff. So I am excited for this race. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, but I just don't really know what to expect. And same with the facility. It seats around 25,000 people. Apparently they're going to be wheeling in some maybe temporary seating for this race. That doesn't sound great. I mean, I'm planning to be there, so hopefully it's decent. But I don't know, just more questions than answers at this point. So I'm going to put it in C tier, really just because I don't really know where to put it at this point. I mean, most everyone's more excited about the idea of the fairgrounds being added to the schedule maybe in the next few years. So, you know, no disrespect to Nashville Superspeedway, but it is viewed at this point, in many people's eyes, as a placeholder. Hopefully it exceeds our expectations this summer though. I'm optimistic it can. Finally, we've saved one of the icons for last. Darlington Raceway has to be put on this list as well. The 1.36 mile track in South Carolina, a historic speedway known for hosting NASCAR Throwback Weekend the last few years. This track, when you talk about a track with character, Darlington Raceway has more than enough of it to go around. You could fill a Hollywood blockbuster trilogy with all the character this thing has in it. That being said, is the racing consistently good at Darlington? I mean, the Xfinity Series last year was fantastic. Those finishes between Hamlin and Chastain and then Kyle Busch and Chase Briscoe. I mean, yeah, when you put low downforce on the speedway and let the drivers really hang it out by the outside wall, you get some pretty fantastic racing more often than not. But still, it's a very narrow racing groove. It's treacherous for sure. It's inconsistent with how great the racing or the finishes or things really are at Darlington, but it is so unique. There is no other oval racetrack quite like it on the NASCAR circuit. And good news, the Cup Series is going back to a low downforce package at that track this year, so I'm looking forward to those races. The Southern 500 is going to be, I think, fantastic this year. It's an old racetrack, but it's an iconic racetrack. Like I said, what it may lack sometimes in on-track racing action, which is hit or miss. It's been great in the past. It's had some great finish. 2003. I mean, that's like maybe the best finish in NASCAR history. What it may lack occasionally in racing action, it more than makes up for in its personality. Like if a track could talk, Darlington would be high on the list of ones you'd want to hear from. So I'm going to put Darlington Raceway in the A tier. I can't quite put it in Groovy tier, but I think it's a very solid A tier, passing with flying colors without a doubt. So there you have it. Here is the Groovy grid for all of the intermediate tracks on the NASCAR schedule as of the year I'm filming this, 2021. So if you're from the future, this list is probably going to look a lot smaller. I have a feeling maybe a couple of these tracks could get the boot here in the next few years, but we'll see. Hopefully not Homestead or Darlington or any of those A tier, Vegas, hopefully not. Let me know down in the comments below if you agree or disagree with any of my rankings. I feel like my hottest take was Atlanta. I feel like most people have Atlanta in the A or B tier. So aside from that one, perhaps, were there any others you were surprised by or that you disagree with? Let me know down in the comments or tweet at me on Twitter at EricEstepp17. Let me know on Instagram at Eric_Estepp and all those other social media platforms. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel. Usually we talk NASCAR news, rumors, predictions. Sometimes we have a bit of fun like we did today, so don't miss a single episode coming up. Thank you as always to my amazing Patreon supporters as well. Could not do the show without your support. I recently opened up a P.O. box once again for the first time in a couple of years, so if you do want to send me something, whatever you want to send, check out that address down below in the description. I'll be checking that out very soon. In the meantime though, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Have a fantastic rest of your day.